Welcome back to Chapter 4, Tissues and Anatomy and Physiology. This is video 14. In this video, we're going to look at tissue repair and then an example of tissue repair with an injury to the skin. So, tissue repair is defined as the restoration of damaged tissue by renewal or replacement with scar tissue. And scar tissue is known as fibrosis, which does not restore original function. So not all types of tissue can go through renewal. And there is replacement of that damaged tissue by another form that fills in the space but does not restore original function. And we probably all have seen scars on our, you have a scar from either surgery or an injury. It might be big, it might be small, but it does not look the same as our original skin did. It is discolored, it's shiny, it has a different surface appearance, and it does not function the same. So with our categories, nerve tissue does not renew. So we have no renewal with nerve tissue. Very, very slight on occasion can occur, but it's very rare that it does. So if nerve tissue is damaged, there's really no restoration of function, which is why if you sever, say, your spinal cord, you lose functionality of parts of your body. So nervous tissue, if you could figure out how to renew or get the body to renew nervous tissue, you'd probably win a Nobel Prize, I would imagine, in medicine or physiology, because that is something that we haven't figured out yet. And that would be a big thing. So if somebody were to sever a nerve, how to get the function back from that. A little bit better in the nerves that come off of the spinal cord, but the spinal cord itself, no renewal. Muscles, very little. So if a muscle is damaged, there can be some renewal of that tissue, but not on a big scale. And that's especially true in a muscle infarction, which is where blood flow is cut off and the muscle tissue dies. It's usually replaced with scar tissue that cannot contract. So people have a lot of issues with movement and pain. The best example I can think of is if you watch House. He has a permanent limp and he uses a cane. That's a medical show. I think it's on Amazon Prime. It's a pretty good medical show, but he had an infarction of a muscle in his leg, and the muscle basically died, and that is no longer a functioning muscle or has limited function. Connective tissue, because there are very few cells, this one has the highest ability for renewal. And epithelial has small scale renewal. So let's look at skin. And we have different steps. So let's say that your skin is injured. So maybe you have a cat and your cat comes along and wants to play and scratches you. Happens to me a lot. So we have a cut into the epidermis, our first layer of the skin, which is epithelial tissue, and it goes down into the next layer, the dermis, which is connective tissue. So we have two different tissues involved here. So the wound fills with blood. And epidermal tissue does not have any blood vessels, but the dermis does. So the wound starts filling with blood and it forms a clot. So eventually it stops bleeding, and we're eventually going to form a scab. So the next part is the surface of the clot dries. So this is a very complex system of blood clotting, but it has to do with a lot of different steps, and it's like a chain reaction. This occurs, this occurs, this occurs, and it's all due to proteins being exposed to air and the protein shapes changing or denaturing based on exposure, with a lot of different steps involved. So it's a very complex, but we end up with a scab formation. And what that does is it seals the wound. So it helps protect the wound from the outside area. So the scab forms on the skin. Now inside clots form in areas, not so much a scab. A scab is mainly for the skin because we want to form a protective layer. So with that, during this whole time, as the tissue is being injured, we have the inflammation response or inflammatory response is taking place. So all of those chemical mediators that we talked about with inflammation are being released. We have redness, we have a little bit of swelling, we have pain. Now, if it's a small scratch and it bleeds a little bit, we're not going to have a tremendous amount of pain, but it's going to hurt. You might not have a lot of swelling in the area, but it is happening on a very microscopic scale. You might have a little bit of redness, but not much. So part of this is dilation of blood vessels. So the blood vessels open up a little bit, which increases fluids and white blood cells for immunity. So we have these white blood cells that are marching along to that area based on chemical mediators being released, and they start eating all the bacteria that was present in the cat's claw that has penetrated your dermis. There's going to be lots of bacteria there in your skin that get inside, which we don't want. So all of these white blood cells just go in and they just start attacking them and eating them up and destroying that bacteria. If a lot of white blood cells are being produced and there's a lot of bacteria in there that don't get killed, something called pus can form. And pus is basically dead white blood cells and bacteria. So as some white blood cells attack the bacteria, the white blood cells actually die along with the bacteria, and it forms a substance. So some of these fluids accumulate, and if there's nowhere for that pus to flow out of, it can build up in underneath your skin, and it can cause a lot of pressure and pain, and it's called an abscess. Usually with a puncture wound that seals itself off, you can get an abscess, but it doesn't occur all the time. The only way to treat this is to remove the pus. So they have to cut open, and we'll take a better look at that when we talk about the integumentary system. So if we do have stem cells present, the stem cells differentiate. So we have increase in stem cell differentiation, which increase renewal if applicable. That's only if stem cells are going to be present for that substance, or we have mitosis of cells. So if it is connective tissue, those cells can start dividing so they produce more fibers. But if it's nerve tissue, we don't have the stem cells present. Nerve cells really don't undergo that much mitosis, so some things don't renew. But if it is going to occur, it occurs. And then we have fibroblasts begin to make collagen to form a temporary tissue called granulation tissue. So this is that white tissue. If you've ever picked off a scab and you've seen like a really pale tissue underneath it, that is temporary tissue that your body is making to help fill that void underneath there. So it's replacing that tissue. And this granulation tissue can revert back to normal tissue, so it can be altered if renewable. And it reverts to scar tissue if not renewable. And I'll have a couple videos of this process in a folder underneath in the YouTube video folder for supplemental viewing.